The point is not to wish for adversities, but for the virtue that makes adversities bearable. And with that, I would like to introduce this week's guest on the Switch podcast, Dr. Mike Simpson. Mike, welcome.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. I need to write that quote down because, as you know, I end my podcast with a quote. So I'm going to be stealing that one in the next couple of weeks. That's a good one.
It's a great one. So before we get into some of the ideas I want to talk about, your podcast and some of the ideas that you routinely talk about, I want to talk first about your story, sort of get a little bit of where you came from, how you developed and grew up. And the way I usually frame it is, if you could divide your life into epochs, at the very least where I was then and where I am now,
sure.
How would you describe how you made that move, that transition?
Great question. So I had, even as a kid, I kind of had, that was kind of divided into, I would say, two separate epochs. One would be kind of the Los Angeles area epoch, which went up until I was around 10, 11 years old. And then, where I was very much a city kid, used to, going to the ocean very, very often, city streets, pavement, not a whole lot, I get lost in a vacant lot. I mean, literally that's the type of city kid I was. And, towards the end of my elementary school years, my dad transferred and we moved to a little town called Tehachapi. And that's when kind of my redneck epoch started. That I lived in this little tiny town. We had 500 people in our high school. My graduating class had 122 people. We had one stoplight in the whole town, and it only had red. It didn't have red, yellow, and green. It just flashed. And it was called the four-way. Like you would say, we'll meet at the four-way. It was a four-way. We had literally one four-way stop in town. No burger franchises, no store franchises, nothing. I mean, a small town America, where, you could walk down the middle of the street with a .22 rifle over your shoulder and nobody would bat an eye, and go out and shoot rabbits and coyotes and everything else. And that was my second epoch, which kind of set me up for going into the Army as soon as I graduated high school, which was the next phase. And in 1984, I enlisted on a Ranger contract, right at 2 weeks out of high school. Went to Fort Benning, Georgia. Went to basic. Went to AIT, Airborne School. Shipped off to Savannah, Georgia, where I went to the Ranger Indoctrination Program. I spent 4 years there. So that was my next epoch. Then got out for a little bit and played around. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought about going into some type of federal law enforcement. I was in the SF Guard, and then we mobilized for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, but we didn't deploy. But I decided that it was time for my next epoch, was to go back on active duty in the military. So as an 18 Charlie Special Forces Demolition Sergeant, I went to 7th Special Forces Group, did that for a while, decided to cross over MOSs and become a medic, did that for a while, and then ultimately decided to go to medical school as I entered my next epoch, as you say, med school, residency in emergency medicine, and then back to Fort Bragg, assigned as an augmentee to the Joint Special Operations Command. And that was kind of my final military era, was doing my 6 years with them and my 5 deployments with them, and then ultimately retiring back here to Texas, so, which is my adopted home now. So.
Nice. What would you say? So some of those are pretty major changes. I mean, they're all major changes, but some of those are major changes that a lot of people don't experience in their lives. Going from civilian right into, like you said, a Ranger contract. Like what was the biggest mind change there? What was the biggest thing in your world that shifted your perspective?
I think I was, back then we didn't have the internet, so I had to depend on books, what I could find in the library. Hollywood fiction was pretty much my only basis for what military life was going to be like. So I kind of had a basic idea of what it was going to be, very, very disciplined and shaved heads and reveille every morning and push-ups in the rain and all of that was kind of my vision. What I didn't know until after I'd been in the Ranger Battalion for about a year is that although the Ranger Battalion was very much true to my vision, the 1980s Army was not true to that vision, because it's, you know, the 1980s Army was every weekend off, and sometimes you called your squad leader by their first name, and people had longer hair and put their hands in their pockets and things like that. But, you know, my version of the Army, you know, the fictitious version was exactly what I was getting in Ranger Regiment. And I think in a way that kind of made it easier for me, because I'm like, well, this is what it's supposed to be like. Because I had actually over expectations of how militaristic and how difficult it was going to be in some ways. Not that it wasn't incredibly difficult at the time.
Oh, I think we lost you for a second there.
Oh, how about now?
I can hear you, but your video's catching up. Okay.
How about now? Am I back?
Are back. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry about that, guy.
No problem.
I was saying, I think I was probably a little less prepared actually for when I got out after 4 years, and nobody in the civilian world cared what I had been doing for the previous 4 years. That meant absolutely nothing. And to basically everybody that I encountered, nobody had kind of the same mindset that I did about being on time and being part of a team. And so that was a little bit of a culture shock, which ultimately, as I said, kind of led to me wanting to go back in. Because yeah, I basically discovered that everything that they told you about the civilian world was true. Everybody needs a haircut. Everybody's out of uniform. Nobody's in charge. So I wanted to go back. So I did, which is ironic because I actually, you know, even in Ranger Regiment and in group, I was kind of an military guy at times, but I guess I was never really willing to make that full commitment to going full on civilian, which is why I won't say that I didn't fit in. I wasn't motivated on a day-to-day basis.
Well, yeah. Well, can you expand on that? What do you mean you weren't a military guy?
I was always one. I always have been one to question. Well, why are we doing that? And there's got to be a why to that. Just for the sake of, well, it's always been done this way, was never good enough for me. Just for the sake of, well, because the commander or the sergeant major says so. I was always the guy in the room, like, excuse me, I think there's a better way to do this. Excuse me, this is kind of stupid that we're standing out here shivering for no reason, when there's a building right there with heat. Why don't we go in there? And I even remember saying one time, I think I was still a buck sergeant at the time. I said, this whole getting up at 5:30 thing was kind of, they came up with that before we had electricity. We probably don't need to do that anymore. So I got a lot of weird looks for stuff like that, because I'm very much a why is it that way type of guy, which I think ultimately is what kind of drew me to medicine, is really understanding disease processes and pathophysiology and why things are the way they are. Why when I stub my toe, does 1.5 seconds later I'm in excruciating pain, and then it continues to ache and throb for another 45 minutes. What's behind that?
What is behind that?
Yeah.
Why is there that delay?
Yeah. So, then we got to talk about your spinal pathways and the delay and everything. It's, basically there's a little bit of phone tag going on, is I think the best way that I can say it. You have these things in your spinal thalamic tract called white rami communicantes, which are faster than gray rami communicantes. It gets a little bit confusing, and I don't want to try to tap dance my way through it, because I haven't had to recite it since my first or second year of med school. But the reason it keeps hurting is because of the healing process, and that's one of the things that's always fascinating, and it's something I'm actually doing a deep dive into now, because you guys will be the first to hear this. I'm actually looking at starting my own line of supplements. Okay. So I'm looking carefully at healing processes and tissue damage, and what your body does right on its own without needing to be corrective, and what you can kind of help your body with to kind of alleviate some of that pain and help you to recover more quickly.
Nice. Okay. Cool. We'll definitely touch on some medical stuff. I have some questions for you. Not like, hey, look at this rash questions, but like
Yeah, I get that a lot.
some, yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the intersection of being a Green Beret and practicing medicine.
Hmm.
Uh, where do you think those, like, what do you think your unique experience was there that,
Hmm.
you know, your average doctor and your average Green Beret don't get? Give me the intersection of the Venn diagram.
The intersection of the Venn diagram. I think for me, I had already, when I went to the SF Medic course, I had the advantage that I'd already been on Operational Detachment Alpha for almost 4 years as a Charlie, as a demo guy. So I knew, and my Ranger Battalion time before that. So I understood the operator lifestyle, the operator mindset. I kind of had, it was kind of a weird chain of circumstances that led me to even going to the medic course. I had a medic on my team at the time who was always telling me, "Hey, exactly what we talked about. You're a really inquisitive guy. You're always looking for like next level thinking. You should go to the medic course because you'd enjoy it and it would challenge you." And I was always kind of like, "Well, yeah, it sounds cool. I don't know if I'm really interested or not." And what ultimately led to me going to the medic course was had some personal things going on, and I just wanted to get away from Fort Bragg and Fayetteville. And at that time, the SF Medic course was in Fort Sam Houston, Texas. So that was kind of the best avenue for me to go. Is I can go to Fort Sam, I can hang out there for a year, and then come back. So I did, and I didn't really know I wanted to be a medic until we did our very first hands-on trauma scenario exam with a role-playing patient. And I ran up to the patient, and in the first couple of seconds, I looked down at the patient and I said, "It's okay, man. I'm a medic. You're going to be all right." And just the power of those words and saying that out loud, I had this sudden feeling of responsibility and like, wow, this is a very powerful thing to be able to look at somebody who's suffering, even though this is in a fake scenario, and tell them that you're going to fix them. That's pretty major. Through the rest of the course, I carried that with me, what that felt like doing regular academic work, doing my clinicals and everything else. And more and more and more, I came to realize that although I loved being an operator, medicine really had a level of a calling for me. And I also knew, I'm a little guy. I'm 5'6". I'm probably running about 175 right now, which is more than I should probably weigh. But I've always been a short, stocky guy. So keeping up has always been difficult. Doing things like obstacle courses that other guys can just run through. Obstacle courses are designed to piss off short guys. Road marching with heavy weights, my stride isn't what other people's is. Running at a sprint or long distances is tends to be a little bit more challenging for me. So there were a lot of aspects of being an operator that were pretty challenging for me, especially when it came to the physical thing. The mental stuff and the fine motor skill stuff, like anything that had to do with shooting, land navigation, anything technical, no problem. I can do this all day long. So I knew that I needed to find, in order for me to be the best asset that I could to my team and to my unit and to the United States Army, I needed to find something that maximized where I was strong and to some extent at least kind of minimized where I wasn't as strong. And being a medic certainly did that. And early on, I had my eye on either going to PA school or medical school because I knew, whereas most people choose the path in special forces that I'm going to be a team sergeant and ultimately a sergeant major, or maybe I'm going to go to the warrant officer course and be a warrant. I had so much respect for the leaders on all the teams that I was on, guys like Kirk Kitchens and Ed Morrell, that I was like, man, I'm never going to be able to hold a candle to these guys leadership wise. I'm always going to be more of a technician. And for that reason, going the medical route is always going to be a better thing for me. And I had a lot of encouragement from a lot of people in my chain of command and they said, we're finally getting to where these Venn diagrams kind of collide in that, we need not just somebody who is proficient in emergency medicine, proficient in trauma medicine in the soft community. We need somebody that on the first day they hit the ground, knowing how an operator thinks, knowing how units work, knowing our TTPs, because typically somebody comes in as a physician, even though they have a residency in emergency medicine and they're well trained, it takes us about a year to get them trained up on kind of how things work. And then they might only have 6 months to a year left before they're gone. So we only get about 6 months of work out of them, realistically. And everyone in my chain of command was like, we need doctors that understand. And that's why everybody, through the battalion commander, through the group commander, when they signed off on paperwork for me to go, they looked me in the eye and they shook my hand and they said, you make sure you come back to the community, because you are what we need. We need somebody who is operational on day one, who understands this, who can jump right in and get the job done. And I think that was the huge advantage that I had going back to the soft community is, ultimately, any physician who is in the soft community, they care mostly about what kind of doctor you are. That's number one priority. They don't care how fast you can run. If you're a triathlon, if you've done eco challenges, if you shoot better than them, none of that matters. If you're going to be able to take care of patients matters. But that's also not going to matter if they have to explain every little thing to you and you can't integrate quickly. So I had there was a lot of bonus stuff. I was a SF qualified, Ranger qualified, jump master, military free fall, a lot of other things. But ultimately, just because I had been around long enough to know the mindset, that also means that all the operators around me can kind of dial it down a notch and relax. I'm not somebody they have to babysit. I'm not gonna flag people with my weapon. I'm not gonna shoot myself in the foot. I'm not gonna walk into a tail rotor. These are all things that I've done before, so I don't need a lot of babysitting. And there were a couple of missions specifically where I could visibly see tension in someone's face, and then you were in group for 11 years. Oh, okay, we're good. Yeah, do what you want, So
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So in the soft community as a medical professional, is your focus primarily trauma, or I guess, is your focus primarily reactive, or are you doing a lot of proactive things as well? Like, are you taking in information about the health status of people on your team? Are you optimizing people's nutrition and things like that? Like, is that a part of that world as well?
It's 100% part of that world. And I didn't have to deal as much with the garrison level proactive stuff because of the unique kind of augmentee position that I was in. I basically got to work at a hospital, be a regular emergency medicine physician for most of any given month. And then about, I think if you averaged it out, about a week out of every month, I would be going to ranges, jumping out of airplanes, going out, flying around in helicopters at night, doing simulated scenarios and things of that nature. What I didn't have to deal with is the day-to-day running sick call in the morning, going to that pain in the ass staff meeting and give them our, this many people are delinquent on their dental, this many people are delinquent on their vision, this many people need yellow fever vaccine. I didn't have to deal with any of that. When I deployed forward, most of that stuff had been done for the people that I worked with pre-deployment. I did engage in a lot of kind of performance optimization, kind of carrying the baton from where it had already been handed off by their physician, by their physical therapist, nutritionist. We take, in modern soft, we take all that very seriously. I would say a lot more seriously than we did in the 1980s. In the 1980s, we were very much old school. And now they are rightfully so treated like professional athletes. Like, these are the number of calories you need today. These are your micros. These are your macros. This is what we want you doing. This is what we want for your rest day right here. This is what we want you to do on a mission day so that you can still be optimized and perform on that mission and everything else. So I did have a little bit of a hand in that, although I can say that most of the kind of the hard groundwork had been done for me. And a lot of what I was responsible for on deployment tended to be a little bit more reactive. If I would have been lazy about it, it would have been strictly reactive. But I enjoyed doing the other part of it, especially because I'd been a team medic before. So I liked that aspect of it. I liked going to the gym with the guys and seeing what they were doing, seeing what kind of workout plan that they had. planning a range day with them. I liked giving classes when we had nights that we couldn't go out because of weather or whatever the intel happened to be. Giving them a class, whether it was at the basic level or for the advanced medics. I enjoyed all that. So I like the full spectrum. I like the deployment aspect of the operational physician job. I never wanted to do the garrison aspect of the operational physician job, and I was blessed in the fact that I did not have to.
Awesome. Nice. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about after, or I guess post-retirement. So I first heard about you before your podcast was called Mind of the Warrior. There was the Sheepdog Project.
The Sheepdog Project, yeah.
That's how I discovered you. So what did you do post-retirement, and how did you end up involved with, Sheepdog and some of the other things there?
The story actually starts 2 months prior to retirement. So what most people don't know, a lot of people know me, as you said, from my relationship to Sheepdog Response and the Sheepdog Project, and or what I did on the History Channel with Hunting Hitler with Tim. Where that starts, actually, in my last year on active duty, I actually branched out quite a bit in doing fight medicine as a combat sports physician. So I was working a lot of ringside, cage side stuff, getting to know the fighters. I kind of became the unofficial fight physician for the fight team out of Fort Hood, of which Colton Smith was the NCOIC at the time. Colton Smith, who won the Ultimate Fighter. Through Colton and through some other people, Tim Kennedy and I ended up having a lot of mutual acquaintances, but not really knowing each other. And then where I finally ended up meeting Tim face to face was he cornered one of Colton's fights, and I happened to be the ringside physician. Fast forward a little bit, Tim and I ended up being social media friends, and he had finished the first season of Hunting Hitler, and he put out a message that they were looking for somebody to add to the cast, and there were a very specific list of requirements, a language requirement, some very specific skill set requirements that even for soft guys are kind of rare. And I sent him a text message and I said, I've got all these requirements. What's going on? And he said, shoot me an email with your resume at this email address. And I did. He forwarded it to the production company. And we could do a whole podcast just on that story, because actually they didn't want to hire me. It's kind of a funny story. So I got hired for that job on Hunting Hitler. And I actually filmed that during my last month on active duty. I was on active. When you see that, I'm actually on active duty in that whole first couple of episodes that I'm in. I had to file for OCONUS leave and get special permission and all kinds of other stuff. But that led to ultimately to the really strong friendship that I had with Tim, that led me to working for the company Sheepdog Response, which I'm sure most of your viewers are familiar with. Is basically the company that's all about personal responsibility, training yourself to be prepared to protect yourself, protect your family, your loved ones at any time, whether armed, unarmed, whatever it might be, working with civilians, law enforcement, first responders, all over the country.
And what was your role there, and how does that lead to the podcast?
Yeah, so I was medical training director, and I had actually started the podcast prior to that. I was still on active duty when I started the podcast, and it was originally called Mind of the Warrior, which it is again now. And it was mostly about MMA. That's mostly what I talked about. I talked a little bit about my military experience. I interviewed Kelly Venden, who's a retired Delta Force Sergeant Major, was on the Commandancia Kurt Muse mission in Panama. Interviewed a couple of different Navy SEALs. Interviewed a lot of fighters: Chael Sonnen, Tim, Colton, Anthony Burchak. And then I kind of put it on hold for a while because I was retiring. I was shooting a documentary. I was a little bit busy. And what ended up happening is Sheepdog was kind of looking for a way to get their message out. And they said, well, hey, what if, you already know how to do the whole podcast thing. And what if we just rebranded you and took it from there, which we did. And my listenership went from like 200 to 10,000 overnight. And I've kept most of that even since it's been back rebranded again as Mind of the Warrior. But Sheepdog, I love doing it. I love, the episodes, especially that I did with Tim, were a lot of fun. The challenge to that though was it kind of put me in a little bit more narrow box, in that kind of every podcast had to be some type of personal improvement message. And after a while, you kind of run out of those and you're kind of retreading them. I kind of like just being able to flip on the microphone and say whatever the hell I feel like. There's a little bit more liberty in that.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. When we started this podcast, just as a side story, some of our listeners have probably heard this before, but we called it The Switch, and we really do focus on ideas and experiences that change our minds. Like, that really is the ethos of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But on some level, that's also an excuse to talk about anything you want.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you find
Brilliant.
something interesting to talk about,
Yeah.
of course, it's something that could change your mind anyway.
Yeah.
So
that's brilliant.
So what is the ethos of Mind of the Warrior now? You know, what is it that you, I guess, how do you see the contribution that you're making to the space with your podcast?
I think if I had to boil it down to kind of its basic nuts and bolts, it's kind of what makes me tick. But I'm not so egocentric to think that everybody, tens of thousands of people want to know what makes me as an individual tick. It's I would say it's a little bit more broad than that, and it's what makes somebody tick who has lived that lifestyle, who has those interests, who served 32 years in the military and under 5 different presidents, and seen a lot of the change in the U.S. military, seen our society from two or more different views, seen cultures all over the world, and kind of what I bring to the table in the way of perspective. And I always try to paint it that way. And even if I'm talking about an issue that might be politically charged, I try to say, this is why, I approach the Second Amendment this way because of my experience, coming to the table with this. I approach law enforcement this way, because these are the beliefs that I have based on my experience. And, a lot of the beliefs, I think the core values that I have are what my parents gave me, but my parents and I have vastly, vastly different views, especially when it comes to how the country should run, how society should work, and the government. I can tell you that my parents and I have never once voted for the same candidate in any election. But it's, I tell my mom all the time, I say, you're the one who gave me my core values, so I have to follow my heart. We both see the same destination. We just see vastly different routes to get there. And that's what I try to give to my listeners is, the route that I have to get there is shaped by the routes that I took walking through the mountains, and the routes that I took walking through the swamp, and the routes that I took, running from the MRAP onto the objective in Iraq, and from the helicopter onto the objective in Afghanistan. So it's all about perspective. And, if I can just kind of drop one thing every episode or every couple of episodes that people can take away as a reflection or maybe a microcosm of their own lives, then I feel like I've succeeded.
Yeah. There's a quote from the description of your podcast that I wrote into my outline that I think embodies some of the principles that you're talking about. So it says, those with the courage and the will to achieve victory have always set themselves apart. Today, these warriors can be found not only on the modern battlefield, but also in the sports arena, in the boardroom, and in the classroom. So those with the courage and the will to achieve victory. In my mind, that's what I see you contributing. You didn't say it in exactly those words this time around, but I think those are the values that you're talking about, that you need to have courage and will to achieve victory. And that translates to anything that you might be trying to do in life. So what are some of the principles that you see, are important to talk about? Just right off the bat, you recently did an episode on personal responsibility.
Yeah.
If you want to start there, you can.
That's actually where I was going to start. And it's kind of surprising even to me that it took me so long to do an episode that I called that, because really that's kind of the basis for everything else. is that at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, it's all about who you're seeing in the mirror. So there's I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Silva compass.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, so the Silva compass, in the Army we have the regular issue lensatic compass, right? But a lot of guys buy these Silva compasses, which you can get at REI, any camping store. The Silva compass has a really big mirror on the inside of it, and the running joke is, what's the mirror for? And the mirror is so when you go, man, who's that son of a bitch that got me lost? Oh, there he is.
Mm.
And ultimately, that's what life is like. Is wherever you are in your life, and you're like, who got me here? Look in the mirror. You got yourself here. And this was a point. So little story for you. So I had a brief period of time where I worked as a corrections officer when I got out of the Ranger Battalion, before I went back in. And we used to tell, especially the younger inmates, say, and when they would complain about kind of their lot in life, the saying was, "Hey man, you should have stayed at the house." And they're like, "What, you mean I should have stayed at the house instead of going to jail?" They came and arrested me. No, no, no. On the day or the night that you went out and did whatever it was that got you in here, you should have stayed home that day. You wouldn't be here. Because ultimately it's personal responsibility. And I hated that job, but I'm really glad I had that job, because I noticed the biggest commonality in people that are incarcerated is failure to take responsibility for why they're there, failure to take responsibility for their own bad decisions. It wasn't yet, yeah, there was some, we definitely, you see the socioeconomic factors there, and you see some other factors there, but the common thread when you talk to them, and I made it a point to talk to pretty much everybody that was in there and get to know everybody that I interacted with. I didn't want any of them ever to just be, the number on their shirt, which this was Georgia back then. They didn't have to wear the number on the shirt anyway, but I didn't want them to be just a name, on a roster somewhere, or a bunk number. I wanted to know a little bit about, why they were there. My sentiment in that at the time was, if I get to know somebody, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to stick a knife in me, number one, and I'm going to know a little bit more about where their buttons are, and how likely they are to do or not do something in the heat of the moment. But I learned a lot about people during that time, and the common thread that I kept seeing was, this was always somebody else's fault. It was a cop's fault. It was a judge's fault. It was a parole officer's fault. It was an ex-girlfriend's fault. It was mom and dad's fault. It was never their fault. And this was in sharp contrast to what I had seen in my 4 years in the military, where if it goes wrong, it's your fault. If it goes well, it's your credit. And I was like, wow, that's the big difference that I'm seeing here, is there's just not personal accountability. And people freak out when I say that, and they say I'm wrong. They say, I'm oversimplifying it. That was my experience, and that was my take. And I can tell you that throughout my career in SOF, the guys who are the most successful are the guys who are all about personal responsibility and accountability. I knew a guy who had the base of his trigger finger severed in an accident, so his flexor tendons would never work in his trigger finger. The day he got discharged from the hospital, he went to the range and fired 600 rounds with his left hand, just to see if he was going to be able to do it, so he could still be an operator. Because it wasn't about the idiot who was supposed to be holding the tailgate up and let it go and slammed his finger. It wasn't about, the fact that we shouldn't even have been out doing what we were doing anyway. We should have been back because index was 2 hours before that. It wasn't about, well, they should just appreciate the kind of job that I've done in the past, and going forward, they should cut me some slack. To him, it was about, I'm going to have to keep up. I'm responsible for that. The guy in the mirror is responsible for that, nobody else. So I have to make lemonade out of lemons about this. And that struck a huge chord with me. And I've seen it in medicine too. Physicians who aren't willing to accept the blame for their mistakes are oftentimes the ones that get sued for malpractice, and rightly so, because they're not, if they're trying to push off problems on a nurse who was only following a written order, or on the patient for not being compliant, That's not being a good physician. Parenting, same way. You know, you have to instill that in your children, and ultimately you have to recognize that, you know, to me, my kids are like a product that I put out there, and I have guaranteed that product. That product literally has my name on it. It has my last name on it. So if that product gets out there and it's defective, it's my responsibility to do something about it. And that's just how I choose to live my life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally on board with that. I think the major objection that I see from people who don't embody that is like, there are things in your life that are not under your control, and
Yeah.
sometimes those things include, you know, pieces of your situation, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, whatever people will list
Mm-hmm.
that is outside of your control.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, that seems to be missing the point
Yeah.
entirely. Like,
Right.
of course there are things that are outside of your control,
Mm-hmm.
but personal responsibility is about acknowledging the vast portion of things that are within your control and acting
Yeah.
within that space, because the stuff that's
Yeah.
outside of your control, it's outside of your control anyway. Like,
Yeah.
why, other than
Yeah.
acceptance, why bother?
Yeah. You- I think if you hit it, you hit on a great point. I think if you maximize doing the right thing and the things that you can control, then when you, and it's the same way we talk about this with self-defense too, right? That the day chooses you. So it's like, oh, well, how was I supposed to know there were two guys behind my car? Okay, well, on this particular night, okay, you can't take care of that, but what you can take care of is, were you training every day in the year up to that? Did you park in the most advantageous place under a light? Did you approach your vehicle from a better angle because you were situationally aware? So if you did all those things and those two guys, oh, well, I saw those two guys from 50 feet away and they realized they weren't going to jump me and they ran off, right? It's because you maximized all the things that you can control. And it's the same with doing the right thing. And I can tell you from being an ER physician, I've never had anybody show up in the ER at 3 o'clock in the morning stabbed because they were in a bad part of town handing out Bibles and free soup. Okay. We have a saying in emergency medicine: the worst thing you can do is just be minding your own business somewhere, because everybody claims they were minding their own business. And then a roll of bills falls out of their pocket, when you're cutting their clothes off, and you're like, yeah, you were minding your own business at 3 o'clock in the morning in the worst part of town. And that guy said, I'm going to go stab somebody who's minding their own business, and chose to stab you. So, certainly we can all be a victim of circumstances. And I've had some terrible things happen in my life. Fortunately, nothing so bad that it's derailed me completely. But you can always stop and take corrective action too. And I had a good friend who worked with me at Sheepdog, and he didn't know I was going to be talking to him, so I'm not going to dime him out. But he made some mistakes in his younger days, and he ended up doing some time behind bars. And ultimately, he came out, had a clean record for so many years that the governor of his state ultimately issued him a retroactive pardon. And the guy's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, family man, Christian, has a great life. He's a rock steady individual in his community, because he realized that. And he kind of saw it. He and I have had heart-to-heart talks about this, that he saw the same thing behind bars, on that side of the bars, that I saw on this side of the bars, which is, wow, nobody in here wants to take responsibility. Some of these guys are in here for their third time. It's this cycle. I'm not coming back here. I'm going to take personal responsibility. I'm going to fix my life. And at the end of the day too, man, you have to, this is something we say in Sheepdog all the time, is, you are who you surround yourself with. So, it's not just enough for you to be responsible. Guess what? And I tell people, if you're the friend that all the time is getting called to help everybody else, you're doing more than your fair share of the load. And I'm not saying cut sling load on people. You need to give them the benefit of the doubt. But if you've got a friend that takes and takes and takes and takes, that's not a friend, that's a dependent. So, you're not doing them any favors by enabling them. And ultimately they may end up dragging you down. We've all got that friend that we kind of half expect that phone call in the middle of the night, that you need to drive someplace that you wouldn't go even during the day, and pick them up because they were playing cards, and now there's this guy and my car won't start. And you're like, oh man, don't put me in this position. This ends in a bad place for both of us. And if any of my cousins are watching, they know exactly what I'm talking about, because most of them are the types to make those phone calls, and I'm not ashamed to say that, because now most of them have kind of squared themselves away. But yeah, man, personal responsibility, and surround yourself with people with the same mindset.
Just to kind of stick on that point for a sec, how do you think you develop that if that's not something that you have at the moment? And how do you
Uh,
assess where the boundaries of what you have control over are and what they aren't?
yeah, you know, Jordan Peterson, I think, he, and I haven't read his book. I understand it's great. I haven't read it. But I know one of the things that he talks about in interviews quite a bit is he says, make your bed every day. Start with the things that you control. Make your bed, pick your shoes and socks up. Establish order out of chaos. And the other things will kind of follow with that. So look at what can you control. Can I choose to drink water and can I choose to eat chicken breast instead of a Big Mac? Yes, I absolutely can do that. Can I choose to do burpees instead of watch television? Yes, I can do that. Most of what I'm talking about here has to do with physical health, but that physical health is vastly important, and everything else kind of follows along with it. Can I choose to go to work in khakis and a polo instead of jeans and a t-shirt, even though my boss would kind of let me get away with either? Yeah, you can choose to do that. Can I choose to empty the dishwasher, even though normally my significant other does it? Yeah, you can do that. Can I choose to make my wife her coffee because she's answering emails? Yeah, you can do that. And these are all things that make your life better. And I'm a firm believer that the more that you kind of give of yourself to others, the more you feel that come back in return. I'm not a big biblical person. I don't go to church, but I know it says that in the Bible in not so many words. So I think making these small changes where you're responsible for yourself, you make a little bit of effort to give to others. And when you show people that you're the type of people, or you're the type of person rather, that is good and rewarding to be around, not just in the physical sense. I'm not talking about lending everybody $5, but you're pleasant to be around, and you're engaging, and you care with people, and you look them in the eye, and you really listen to what they have to say, not wait for your turn to talk. Then there are people that are going to want to be around you, and that's going to attract more positivity, and that's going to help you kind of spot the people that are fake and not worth your time as well. I have a very small group of people that I hang around with, and even the people that I do hang around with, mostly it's my wife and I. We don't get out a whole lot. We don't plan weekend stuff, with other couples and stuff, other families necessarily. When I do stuff with the group that I'm close to, it's always generally positive stuff. We're not lighting a bonfire and getting shit faced, although there's nothing wrong with that. Usually it's involving something that's going to better all of us in some way. Whether that's doing a workout together, going to the range together, getting together and helping out one of our friends who needs, a barn raised or whatever it might be. These are choices that you make. It's people give you their resume, whether they know it or not, usually within the first hour or so that you know them, and you need to pay close attention to that. There's a saying that I heard when I was filming Hunting Hitler, and it was Noah Liebelt was the sound guy on that, and he said this. He said that there's three kinds of friends: for a reason, for a season, and for a lifetime. So friends for a reason is, well, this is the guy that I go fishing with, right? Friends for a season is, well, I live next door to this guy for a year, or I went to school with him for a year. And then there's the third are the ones you should really be paying attention to. The ones that are your friends for a lifetime. You don't owe each other anything. You're not in it for all ulterior motives for any reason. And those are the friends that really count. Those are the friends that are going to be there when you need a kidney, or when you're on your deathbed, or when your house burned down. Those are the friends that you're going to turn to.
Yeah. We've talked about that as, oh, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Would you say all your friends are why people who ask why?
I don't know if I've never put into those words before. Yeah, not necessarily. I kind of think a lot of my friends is they're more like, why not people? When others look and say why, I say, like, Tim Kennedy is a classic why not person. He doesn't look and say why. He says, why not? It's, and a lot of my friends tend to be that way. I'm being very positive on this. I'm actually probably the most negative of my friends. Those who used to follow me on Twitter knew how extremely negative I could be, which is why I got off of Twitter. But that's just kind of part of who I am. I like the pointed, poisonous jab. I get some perverse pleasure out of that, and I'm not proud of that. But I'm open about it. Hey, that is who I am. I'm the same person who talks about bettering yourself, and then I'm that guy who will call somebody a window licker and make them look stupid. Yes, I've done that. It's, again, I'm not proud of it, but I'm honest about it, and all my friends know that.
Yeah. Oh, I think you froze for a second. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Okay. So that's personal responsibility. What are some of the other, I guess, principles of that warrior mindset that we could cover? I'm sure that there are more than we can cover in a full podcast, or at least they're deeper than we can cover. But what's something else that comes to mind?
I think challenging yourself and not being too comfortable. I'm comfortable in my life, so I look for ways to challenge myself, and I think it keeps you sharp. Everybody has ego. I have ego, so I like to do things that kind of take that rug out from under me. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu being, the one that I talk about the most. And, I openly tell people I'm probably the worst purple belt on the planet, and I'm okay with that. It's because I like going in there, and if I've got a little bit of ego from a previous class or a previous role, there's always some headhunter blue belt that's going to take that away from me. And I enjoy that because I know especially when it comes to physical stuff, and even especially when it comes to self-defense, these guys that have way too much ego are the guys who are just kidding themselves, and the guys who ultimately go out there and just get creamed when it matters, when it's in the street. And ego is the enemy of improvement in a lot of ways. Confidence is good. Having some ego is good. Nobody wants you to be too timid, but deconstructing that ego every chance you get is a good idea, and challenging yourself. And I have a fitness coach that that programs me workouts, makes me do exercises that I absolutely hate, because that's what I need to do at age 54 to stay healthy and to continue to improve and build muscle and be better on the mats and better on the range, and better in my capacity as a SWAT physician and as a human being, because my plan is to live to age 102. So in order to do that, I have to keep doing things like this. And challenging yourself is important. And I used to say at the sheepdog classes, at the end of a class, I used to say, if I'm 100% sure at the hospital where I work that every other doctor in there, I can kick everybody's ass. That's not a big deal, right? They're doctors. They're not fighters. They're not operators. But if you say to yourself, I'm the toughest person among all of my friends, go find some tougher friends. Find friends that are going to challenge you. And I like hanging around with people that I know are faster than me, stronger than me, more technically proficient than I am, because it always gives me something to chase. It's back when dog racing was still a thing. I don't think it is anymore. They used to have the rabbit that went out on the track because dogs need something to chase. It wasn't a real rabbit; it was an electronic rabbit. But, human beings are the same way. You need somebody to pace. You need that pace car to go after, and you need goals. And if you're going out there, at the end of the day, you only compete with yourself, and that's the only thing that I go away. If I go home and I did worse than the previous me from a week ago, whether that's shooting, fighting, fitness, whatever it might be, I have a really hard time with that. But if I go out and every single one of my friends submitted me, outshot me, and did heavier squats than I did, that's fine. Because as long as I'm improving, they're pacing me and they're bringing me up. And I think that's extremely important, is just continuing to find challenges. And historically, warriors have always been about challenges and always about finding different ways and getting out of their comfort zone. And I took a little flack recently on social media because I kind of made some tongue-in-cheek posts specifically about Bruce Lee and about what he'd be like as a fighter today. And some people took that as disrespect towards Bruce Lee, and it absolutely wasn't. And I think, I'm not going to pretend to speak for him, but I think if he were alive, he would have agreed with what I said, in that, you know, the people that look at who he was, say 1 week before his death, and say that person could beat up anybody today, they're kind of missing out on what his ethos was, which is continue to improve, continue to evolve, continue to find new ways to challenge yourself, continue to pressure test everything you do. And that's not just in mixed martial arts and martial arts in general or fitness. It's in everything. It's, you know, it's in your business. Pressure test what you're going to do before you go out there and do it. You know, you study for an exam, right? You don't just read the book and then you try to see if you can read it, right? Whether you can flashcards or whatever that might be. That's pressure testing. You need to pressure test everything you do in life, and it makes you. Oh, did my connection freeze up again?
It did. We're back now. You're good.
Okay. You know, it's, you know, pressure makes diamonds, right? So yep. If you want to improve, you need to subject yourself to pressure. You need to put yourself to the challenge. Otherwise, you know, if life is not a downhill. Maybe for some people it is, but sooner or later you're going to have to pedal for most people. So your choice is you can pedal a little bit every day and continue to put a little bit of effort in it, or you can wait till you come to a dead stop at the bottom of a hill and then try to pedal your way up. And good luck with that.
And I think one of the important things that you bring up about like exercise, for an example, is it's an objective measurement. You can set objective measurements for pass and fail and progress. And
yes.
You know, something like with this podcast, for example, recording right now, how would we assess its successfulness? You know, it's more theoretical, right? Mm-hmm. But with exercise and, like you said, shooting, you can really have a linear goal set up so you can kind of offload some of that mental energy and just have a plan set up, do it, accomplish it, refine it, do it again.
Yeah, dude. So you put it so well, in that objectivity is a huge key to that in whatever it is you're doing. And, you know, we all, and I've been guilty of this myself, you know, people say things like, oh, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to get more exercise. What does that mean? Get more exercise, you know, or I'm going to start exercising. Okay, well, you can do that in like 2 seconds and you've achieved your goal. But, you know, if you say specific things like, well, you know, I know that I can do 20 push-ups, I'm going to work my way up to 200 push-ups. You know, or I know I can squat 150 pounds, I'm going to get up to 275 pounds, whatever it might be. It's important to have those objective goals, because they basically tell you whether or not you've been wasting your time or not too, which, you know, time is the one thing that none of us are going to be able to get more of. You know, you can't, no matter how much money you have, you can't buy time. You can't borrow time from anybody else. So ultimately, how you spend your time is extremely valuable, because we only get one shot at this. You know, I tell people all the time, life is an open book test, but it's also a timed test. So you've only got so much time to do it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, adding on to that, you can, if you create a plan, an exercise or something that you see creates this progress, you can apply those techniques to less objective things. You know, I'm going to use the same strategy, and I'm going to be able to trust in that, and, you know, be able to, it might be a more long-term assessment of success or fail, you know, 5 years down the line, but you're going to be able to use those techniques. And I really credit a lot of what, you know, I would look back in and call successes for myself with that initial obsession and getting into weightlifting, because it provided the only, I feel like, objective analysis of my life that I'd ever had.
Really, and that's important, because we lack a lot of objectivity, a lot of objective analysis in life. You know, we talk about, you know, my generation and the generation before me, you know, likes to talk about the everyone gets a trophy generation. I know you guys have heard that time and time again, but it is, I think that's an oversimplification, but it is true to some extent that we have done away with a lot of the objectivity. And I understand where that philosophy comes from, but it can be a little bit dangerous, because once you start to institute that objectivity in one part of your life, as you did, then you start to kind of translate that over into other areas of your life. You know, you start to become a little bit more goal oriented. I never thought in those terms really until you said it, but something as small as that can be that catalyst. You know, whether it's where I am on the leaderboard on my Peloton bike, whether it's weightlifting, whatever it might be.
There's some interesting details on that generational shift in the Jonathan Haidt book, Coddling of the American Mind. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's absolutely worth reading. Some good insight into that exact shift that you're talking about. So just to cap that off, the other way that I would put that is definiteness of purpose. That's that particular phrasing comes from Napoleon Hill in Outwitting the Devil. Essentially talks about how if you want something out of life, you have to be willing to pay life's price for it. You have to understand your purpose in that sense, define it, and contextualize your entire life around it. The way that I've done that, I keep a notebook that every single day, I'm actually on vacation now, so it's slipped a little bit, but every single day I rewrite my goals, including the dates that I would like to have them done by. I write them in enough detail that it's very clear to me, what do I need to do today to make the incremental step toward that? And the other thing that does is it primes your psychology first thing in the morning to, as you go out throughout the day, interacting with the world in various ways, everything is contextualized around, does this bring me closer to the things that I care about? Or is this a distraction? Is this moving me backward, or is this moving me forward?
Yeah. So I take away two really important things when you say that, and that's very, very well put. The first thing, when you talk about, is this a distraction or does it get me to my goal? What I think of when I hear that is, a friend of mine and I are actually working on a screenplay right now for a mini series. And that's one thing that he's taught me about script writing, is every scene should be moving the story forward. In that, you can't just have some worthless scene because it's cool, two guys talking and jets are flying by just because jets are flying. Did we need that? Why do we need to establish that jets are flying by? Something like that. And it really does carry over to life. Exactly how you put it is, and so many people don't do that. They're kind of on the raft, just kind of moving down the river, not really looking at, does that add to what I'm doing? Or does that distract me, like you said, from what I'm doing? The other thing that I took away from what you said, I recently, my wife and I had a conversation, and I do not remember the gentleman's name. He's a neurobiologist who was on Rogan recently, and he was talking about specifically guys like Jocko, guys like David Goggins, who the way they perform, and it has to do with kind of the reward aspect of the way they approach things. In that, it's all about kind of slicing things up, and if you think about it like on a run, like if you're going to run 26 miles and all you're thinking about is, man, this 26 miles is a long way, that's really hard. But if you're like, well, I'm going to run to the corner, and then I'm going to run to the next corner, and then I'm going to run to the next corner, and then I'm going to run to the next corner, that kind of makes it a little bit easier. And then you feel good about the important part is you feel good about yourself when you get to that corner, not, oh my God, I have 128 more corners to go. Just, hey, I did that corner. I feel good about that. And I did. My wife watched it, and then she talked to me about it and asked me for my perspective. And I said, I have always approached things that way. And I noticed that when I was in Special Forces selection, my goal every day when I woke up was not, I wasn't even looking at getting through the day. I was getting through, what are we doing this morning? Go out and check the chalkboard, be at this location in uniform with running shoes. Okay, you guys are doing a run and it's somewhere between 5 and 8 miles. Go. Okay, well, I'm going to finish this run. And as soon as I finished the run, I kind of give myself a little pat on the back. Hey, I finished that. That's one less thing I have to do today. Then, you get cleaned up, you have a meal, you come back with your rucksack, you go do land nav or whatever it is that afternoon. Okay, that was another thing that I had done. So that day was behind me. The guys that were just constantly dwelling on, and I would hear them saying things like, I can't believe we're only on day 3. And it's like, I wasn't even thinking about what day we were on. I was thinking about what we're going to do this afternoon and just getting that done. And then feeling pretty good about the fact that I got to the land nav point and I handed in my scorecard, and I was only the 3rd guy to get there, so I must be doing pretty good, and smiling inwardly about that. And the guys who did that tended to not absorb all of that stress and do better. And I think that's really, really important. Setting those, I call it, fence posting, setting a little fence post for yourself and patting yourself on the back, because it's not just enough to have a goal, because how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? And some people, and I'm sure you're the type of guy that has elephant-sized goals, right? So, but you have to have those steps to get there, because if you don't have those steps, you're never going to get there. It's not only because you don't have a roadmap, but because psychologically, it's just going to prove too difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay. I want to ask you about, and I don't even know necessarily if you are the right person to ask about this in a deep way. So if you feel like you're not, at the very least, you are definitely the right person to point me in the right direction. So
okay.
We talked a little bit about performance medicine and how, that world intersects with the operator world. What is the difference between performance optimization in terms of health and longevity optimization? And is there a difference there?
There can be a difference there. So longevity optimization. So I'll give you an example from my own experience. So performance optimization is if I'm going to perform on target and keep up with everybody else. I need to be doing, number one, I need to be doing a very specific exercise profile as far as what exercises I'm doing, for both strength and cardiovascular fitness. And then I need to also be running through that profile, that full mission profile, kind of duplicated in training, in that I'm wearing full kit, I'm wearing the helmet, I'm wearing my NVGs, I'm wearing my aid bag at night under limited visibility, as close as possible to simulating mission conditions. And I am stressing my body to do that, because that's how I'm going to figure out how to adjust this, how to cinch up that, what my body can and can't do when it comes to approaching an obstacle or a situation. So that's performance optimization, right? Is that longevity optimization? Well, I've got 2 herniated discs in my neck that would say no, that is not longevity optimization. Because I know that the reason I have herniated discs in my neck is from repeated axial loading and repetitive trauma in the form of a helmet with night vision goggles on it. I know that's why. So yeah, that's going to affect my longevity. I have, because of that, I have nerve impingement. I have nerve damage because of impingement in both of my elbows, nerve damage because of my neck. I've got some horrendous things going on in my lower back and knees, that on the road to performance optimization, I sacrificed some longevity optimization. Now, that being said, we know more about that today than we did in 1984. So a lot of those mistakes are not made in the same way. So whereas the two looked like this, longevity optimization and performance optimization looked like this in 1984, they look a little bit more like this now, okay? Will they ever be like this? Honestly, I don't know. It's kind of difficult to get there. And I think that's true for any professional athlete as well, because, for a lineman to come off the line explosively and smack into his counterpart with all those foot-pounds of force, he has to do some things to his body that are going to affect him longevity-wise. But you'll notice that the athletes, the professional athletes who do the best longevity-wise, and his name escapes me. Did you guys watch the Titan Games at all?
No.
So the Titan Games, the Rock hosts it, and in the early part of the season, they had a guy on there. He's a former Pro Bowler football player, and you look at him on that show, he physically doesn't look anything like the way he did when he played, and that's smart because now he has kind of transitioned from performance optimization as a football player to a little bit of performance optimization because he's on this show that's kind of like a cooler version of American Gladiators, and also longevity optimization. So the professional athletes that do the best longevity-wise are the ones that kind of recognize that and go through a little bit of a transformation when they get out. And I certainly have. I don't run anymore at all because I've kind of checked that block. I've kind of put on enough miles on, and what I do fitness-wise is more about longevity, durability, preventing injury, strengthening myself in ways that that gear specifically into my chosen pastime, which is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so that I can do that without getting hurt. Now, if I were gonna fight MMA, I would have to do some transitions to a higher level of cardio, a lot of neck strengthening stuff, so that I wouldn't get knocked out. I'd have to have a lot more explosive power on my legs, but those would all take a toll on my body in different ways.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so this is a good start to the conversation. This is a conversation that Alex and I have had in private before that I want to expand into the podcast.
Oh, real quick, I just want to point out, this isn't a paid plug, but I just want to point out for everybody, this is Zevia. This is sugar-free. I'm not drinking crap.
Good, great.
Yeah, that's not a paid endorsement.
Yeah. So I lost my train of thought. No, I'm good.
Sorry, man, I got you off track.
It's okay.
Okay.
So this is a conversation that Alex and I have had before. There are obviously certain things that are antithetical, right? Like you mentioned, if you want to fight in MMA, you have to do certain, you said neck strengthening and explosive power things that in the long term may have negative effects on your health from a longevity perspective. And obviously there are certain things that cross over. For example, in my mind, I think of vitamin D levels off the bat. There's no, as far as I understand, there would be no detriment to either performance or longevity by making sure that you're vitamin D sufficient. In your, I guess, medical practice with doing things like, fight medicine, and even in your market research for, upcoming supplement company, do you see some of those goals coming out in people? Like, are people specifically interested in those goals, and are people mindful of the fact that there are those trade-offs in certain areas?
Yes and no. Youth doesn't care. People told, I had senior NCOs telling me when I was an E5 sergeant in Ranger Battalion about what I was doing to my body. But when you're young and healing feels different, you tend not to care. I think people are a little bit more aware of it now. I think because of the criticism, I think number one, so out of the conflict that we just finished, guys stayed in a lot longer. It's guys were on teams as operators, as graybeards, which was not something that we saw back in the 80s and 90s. Those guys were a rarity, but as a multi-year war drug on, guys didn't want to get out. Guys didn't want to leave their teams, so they tended to hang on to that a little bit longer. So that caused them, a lot of them did some of their own research. That caused units to do their own research, and the military to look at performance optimization and longevity optimization as kind of and how they could coexist. So some changes were made. As I said, they went from there to here. I do want to talk about when you talk about things like vitamin D levels and things of that nature. When we're talking about homeostatic optimization, that tends to be, though those lines are a lot closer together. I mean, and probably overlap 90%. It's, there is a potassium level that you want, there is a calcium level that you want, and a sodium level that you want, and it's always in your body's best interest to keep it there, right? Aside from the bullshit that you'll hear the snake oil salesmen tell you about where your pH value needs to be to prevent cancer, which is complete horseshit. Because if I drink an entire bottle of hydrogen peroxide, my body's, after I throw up, my body's going to neutralize the pH change in the matter of about 5 minutes. So it really doesn't matter. No one should ever drink a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. It will kill you. Don't do that.
You won't get cancer.
But homeostatically, you won't get cancer. True. You'll die for a whole other reason. At the cellular level, because the cell doesn't know. At the cellular level, that whether it's a myocyte, whether it's a glomeruli, whether it's the islets of Langerhans, whatever it might be, it has no idea. Am I on a helicopter getting shot at, or am I in a rocking chair, at age 78? It doesn't know. So, at the cellular level, good diet is good diet. Now where that kind of crosses over at the metabolic level, and again, this illustrates the point that you and I were making. Do I need to drink an energy drink for some performance optimization, knowing that my kidneys aren't very happy about it? Things of that nature. Because I'm sleep deprived because that is part of performance in this training evolution or in this mission set, that I have to be sleep deprived. So how am I going to optimize performance? But like anything, man, it's, you pay now or you pay later, right? So you get enough sleep now, or, it's, you're chopping, I like to say to people, you're chopping telomeres off, man. So, once you run out of telomeres, you can't reproduce your cells anymore. So, I don't know how many telomeres I've chopped off, probably a few. So, but I'm trying to make up for that now by not doing the things that I might have thought were a good idea 15, 20 years ago.
Slow the chopping. Yeah.
It seems to me like it makes sense that like a lot of optimization is that kind of homeostatic idea, right? It seems to me like the place where it seems like it would really start to diverge would be when you include pharmaceuticals.
Pharmaceuticals can make a huge impact on it. So and that's why, not to plug it yet, because I'm still in the development stage, but that was one of the things that I looked at, because specifically the supplements that I want to get out there are for guys like me. So it'll be 40 and over, guys who maybe it's time to pay the piper because they had some performance optimization when they were younger, and they still want some level of performance optimization, but now they were able to get away with this then. They need to be a little bit more like this now. So that's where I'm looking at, restorative stuff, healing stuff, again, helping your body's healing process where it needs it. And, maybe trying to tamp down those areas where your body tends to overreact and cause cytokine interleukin release and cause noxious stimuli and cause you to have that pain in your joints or whatever it might be. So, I'm looking at stuff that's scientifically based, and I think can help people, guys like me, again, who want to continue to be active, want to get out there and shoot, move, communicate, and do all the stuff that they did before, and to help them, because quite frankly, it's there, the country and western song, I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. Yeah, that's kind of a true statement. I can go out there and do a training evolution and sprint through it and keep up. And whereas the other guys can go, wait, let's do one more, I'm kind of wiped for the day, right? That's it for me, because my recovery time is a little bit longer. So I think that's where guys who are in my age bracket and kind of living a similar lifestyle can benefit, is by helping them with their recovery, helping them get that little kick in the pants to get started, helping them recover, helping them to sleep, and help them to have kind of overall homeostasis and wellness going forward. Because we all deserve at least a shot at getting to triple digits.
Yeah. Nice. So we're man, there are so many things that I want to hit on this podcast. We're getting close on time, at least.
Because I'm so long-winded.
No, I mean, it's because there's so much interesting stuff to talk about. You know what? In the spirit of, so we were talking before the podcast about the episode of your podcast that you did with your wife, excuse me, on marriage and relationships. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what were the main points there, the main takeaways? And obviously, people should go listen to that podcast if they want to hear the whole thing. But that the reason that's interesting for me is it seems like a departure from what you would normally expect from this, tough, manly, mind of the warrior podcast. And we're talking about love and marriage, and you've got your wife on.
Yeah.
Talk about that podcast a little bit.
Yeah. So I was really, really happy that Denise agreed to do it, because, she is everything that I am is because of her. And I can say that completely and honestly. She's a life and leadership coach, and she's my life and leadership coach. So, she has shown me so much about myself and things that I didn't know or couldn't verbalize from, my life before she came into it, that I had accomplished things, but I didn't really know how I got there. And she's been able to kind of put the microscope on that and say, this is how you got there, because, you approached it in this way. And it's really helped me moving forward. I think my headphones are going out. Had she not been with me in the transitional phase of me retiring from the military, I think I probably would have fallen apart completely. But she was instrumental in helping me with that. Is my sound still good? Okay, because I'm getting a little warning beep in my pods here. But really, the things that we talked about, and the number one thing, and again, this is something she taught me, is you have to be a complete person in order to enter a relationship and give of yourself in that relationship and get out of that relationship what you want. If you're an incomplete person and you're looking to be a complete person by entering a relationship, you're not good. You're not doing yourself any good. And you're not doing the other person any good. And you have to release them. Her words in her wedding vows to me, and her words to me in reaffirmation all the time, is that I'm not responsible for her happiness, and she's not responsible for my happiness. You have to be happy on your own, and then you can be in a happy relationship with somebody else who is also happy on their own. One person can't be propping the other up, and it's a partnership. The best piece of marriage advice I think I ever got from anybody was a surgeon that I was deployed with, who'd been he was married, had 3 kids, and unlike most people in the military, he'd never had a divorce and had an exceptionally happy marriage. I said, what do you think your secret is? And he said, well, I'll tell you. He said, you're not most people think of marriage as 2 boats that kind of meet out in the ocean and sail along beside each other. And he goes, but when the seas get rough, you can get separated. He goes, and that's not what marriage is about. He goes, one of you can see a shiny object over there and steer away. That's not what marriage is about. He said, you got to be in one boat. He said, you're in the boat together. And he said, and I'll tell you what else, you can't be fighting over the rudder either. One of you can, he goes, I'm not saying one person or the other has to have their hand on the rudder, but only one can have their hand on the rudder at a time. And he said, and that's, we've prioritized a lot of things with me on the rudder, going to medical school, going to surgical residency, being in the unit, coming to Fort Bragg. He goes, there's times when it's my wife's turn on the rudder. And he goes, you can't be complaining about whose turn it is on the rudder. You have to both agree that person's turn is on the rudder. And that's just the way things work. And I really took that to heart, and I shared that with Denise, and that's the way that we've looked at our marriage and kind of the direction and how things go. And I'm just incredibly blessed that she's in my life and puts up with me. I think is in a nutshell.
Amazing. Yeah. And again, I recommend that podcast to anybody who is even remotely interested in understanding, what a relationship should be. It's, yeah. Okay. So the last thing that I really want to hit before we move on to the off topic and audience questions is about stories and data. One of the things that makes your podcast unique in my mind is that you have a very deliberate and articulate way of separating stories and data, specifically with hot topics in the news. Things like COVID, masks, hydroxychloroquine, various responses. Is the economy important? Is it important to quarantine? Things like the Second Amendment, do certain death counts matter? Do certain crime statistics matter? And police violence, again, do certain statistics matter and do they not? And so we don't necessarily need to hit the object level of any of those topics. You're welcome to if you want, but I want to ask you about your approach to understanding topics like that. How is it that you pull out the important pieces when there's so much storytelling happening that doesn't always match up with data?
Yeah. I think because I automatically assume whenever I hear anything from anybody, whenever I see an article pop up on my feed, I automatically assume that whoever put that together has an agenda. Whether it's an agenda that coincides with mine or not, I don't care. I assume that they have an agenda. So I try to cross-reference everything that they say in there and break it down and look at the actual numbers. And I try whenever possible to go to the most reliable sources that I can. And you brought up the example of the gun statistics. I go to the FBI database and I look at the actual numbers, because I hear a lot of things thrown around. A number that I don't think I talked about on that particular episode is the number of how many guns get used in the prevention of crime per year. And the reason is because nobody can validate it. It's, there's crazy numbers out there and nobody's ever been able to validate it. But another crazy number that's out there that gets thrown around all the time is if you have a gun in the home, you're 3 times more likely to be shot with your own gun, which was never said, and that's not backed up by any statistic. So I did a deep dive into kind of where that came from. And basically it's all about, because I'm a physician, because I'm a scientist, to me, I'm all about what were the variables? What were the confounders in that? Did they take into account X? Did they take into account Y? Nothing is ever as simple as it seems. And unfortunately you can, and I've talked about this on my podcast, you can very easily lie with those statistics. I can make them mean anything that I want, because I can pick and choose how I'm going to report those statistics, whether I'm going to report them as a segment of the population, so COVID's a great example. So it's, is the number of deaths important as raw data? Well, yeah. Are the number of deaths looking at the entire population of the US important? Well, yeah, but it's a little bit more important is the deaths compared to the infectivity rate, right? Because the number infected and the number of dead, because then that's the actual percentage. That's your actual chance of dying if you get it. So that's important. And then another number nobody wants to look at, I would say nobody of a certain political spectrum wants to look at, is the hospitalizations number, which is really a much more important number than anyone gives it credit for, because it doesn't matter if all 327 million of us have it, and it doesn't matter if only 2 people are dead from it. If 50 million of us are in the hospital, that's more hospital beds than we have. That means the hospitals are completely tied up and people are dying of heart attacks and strokes out on the street. So that's an important number. And I kept trying to drive that home to people when people would go, well, the death rate is down to almost whatever. Death rate's the lowest it's ever been. Well, how many people are in the hospital right now? Well, I don't know. Well, that's what you need to be looking at. And people on the other side of the spectrum are like, look at all these new cases. We've had an explosion of new cases. Yeah, but the explosion of new cases was in the age demographic from 25 to 35, and almost none of them, at least initially, are in the hospital. Now, in a week, when they go home and give it to all their extended relatives, yeah, then we're going to have a problem. So you have to look at the numbers for what they are. You have to look at confounding variables. And I try not to look at anecdotal stuff, and we're all guilty of it because we all look at our own experiences, right? And I can tell you there are things that I do in my medical practice that might not be supported by really, really strong data, but it's like, but you know what? I always do it and it always works. I'll give you an example. I give all my migraine headache patients magnesium because it's all, to me, I strongly feel that it works. I also take magnesium. Magnesium is the most underused supplement, and it's almost impossible to give somebody too much. You have to be giving them IV magnesium, and they have to have some degree of kidney impairment to give somebody too much magnesium. I'm not saying go out and take a whole bottle of magnesium, but almost everybody can benefit from taking some 500 milligrams of magnesium before you go to bed at night. It helps with headaches. It helps with respiratory function if you're an asthmatic. It's and again, there's not wonderful data out there. Actually, there's a little bit data out because I just retook my boards, and there were some questions specifically dealing with magnesium, especially as it applies to asthmatics. It was on some of my practice questions specifically had that in there, which didn't have one on the regular test that I recall. But anecdotal stuff isn't bad in and of itself, but if all you're depending on is anecdotal stuff of, well, I've seen it. Well, I took hydroxychloroquine and I felt better in 2 days. Well, did you drink prune juice? Because maybe the prune juice made you better in 2 days. Or maybe the zinc you took made you better in 2 days. Or maybe you were just going to get better in 2 days. Maybe it had nothing to do with anything that you took. So looking at things anecdotally, there's a lot of danger in that. And I always, again, this all circles back to what we said at the beginning. I was always the why person, right? Well, why? And I continue to kind of be the why person. And it doesn't matter, I will argue against my own point of view to try to deconstruct that and figure out where the flaws are. And I think it's important that people do that. It's too often, and I posted about this, everybody click. Ooh, there's something that totally falls in line with every bias that I have on a particular issue. It would take me literally 30 seconds to confirm that, but I get much more satisfaction out of just reposting it. And so all this crap ends up in my timeline from all my friends, and I do 30 seconds of research, and I go, no, you were wrong. This was debunked. And they're like, well, doesn't matter. It might as well be true, or something like that. It's like, well, yeah, but it's not. So why, this is 90% of what is on social media is complete bullshit. It's people's opinions framed in something that looks like evidence, and it's really not.
Yeah, it's not a great place to fact find.
No, cool. It's a cesspool. And then people complain about the fact checkers. The fact checkers are censoring me. Well, the fact checkers are censoring you because you posted something that's just patently untrue.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Mike, what, if anything, are the topics that we have missed that, if you want, we can cover something quick, or leave it for next time before we move to the off-topic and Q&A?
No, I think we covered pretty much everything. It's I think we're kind of we kind of started to dovetail into the off-topic with what we were talking about just then. So I think it kind of fits.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll use it as a good transition. First, Alex, you have any other questions that you wanted to hit?
No, I just, as you were talking, that was basically the same question I had, Chase. And it seems like I drew in my notes basically like a kind of a chart that's like starts out with asking the question why, right? So that could just be the curiosity at its core, right? And then it goes to the level of what you were just discussing. Okay, how do I assess the answers I'm getting for this question? How do I sort through the validity of these things? And then it goes through that chain and then down to, okay, now how do I act? What do I do to act on that? And how do I incorporate that into my life? And that just kind of the cycle. And it seems like that's if somebody doesn't have that initial why, that's a huge hurdle in this chain. You know, if they're not asking the question, they don't get to those other steps. So, or at least not consciously. So
Exactly
yeah,
right.
I wanted to point out.
Nice. Yeah, brilliant. All right. Well, for anybody who is not familiar with our podcast, we do at the end like to ask our guests for a topic. We like to call this the off topic. Typically, it can be either something, you know, heavy and serious or lighthearted and fun. It's an opportunity for our guests to bring in a topic that's not directly related to the main things that we're talking about. So without further ado, Mike, what do you have for us?
So what I want to talk about on the off topic is kind of what we were kind of alluding to, is, you know, so right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and what has ended up happening is people are in these camps. You have the mask camp and the I'm not gonna wear a mask camp, right? And it's become like this line in the sand. You have the hydroxychloroquine works camp and the hydroxychloroquine doesn't work camp, right? And what's odd is I am in, although I consider myself to have political leanings in one specific direction, I'm actually in the opposite camp from 90% of the people that have those political leanings on both of those issues, because I look at them scientifically. But I think it illustrates the broader point. I was having a text back and forth with a friend of mine who leans a little bit the other way politically from where I do today. And we're talking about how divided this is, how divided we are as a country. And I said, yeah, you know, short of an alien invasion, I don't know what's going to bring us together. And he said, well, the irony is a pandemic should have brought us together, but people drew political lines very early on and ran even farther into their camps. You know, and now everything that happens, they like double down on it. It's a see, I told you so mentality. So, you know, we're, you know, 2020 has been a dumpster fire. I know we all agree with that. We're going into an election. People are already, we're this far out. People are already talking about if there's one side, if there's mail-in ballots, then the election is invalid. The other side is saying if there's not mail-in ballots, then there's voter suppression and the election is invalid. So both sides are already digging in their heels for why they are going to reject the election if they don't get the results that they want. And I just want everybody to stop, take a deep breath, and realize that the people that disagree with you politically, regardless of which side you're on, they're not monsters. They're not terrible people. They love their parents. They love their children. They love their dog, and their dog loves them. Okay. They want the same things out of life that you want. They just see slightly different ways of getting there. Okay. So when you start to dehumanize the other side, and say, well, they're evil, you know, basically what you're doing is you're starting to justify hating them and justify violence against them, because you start to use terms like, well, they're fascists. Everybody agrees that fascists are terrible people and you should do bad things to fascists, right? You know, and on the opposite side of that, well, they're communists. Hey, nothing more fun than throwing communists out of helicopters. Yes, I know that's a terrible joke. But you start to paint people with these broad and patently untrue brushes, right? You're not doing yourself a favor. You're fomenting hate. And, you know, ask yourself, it all goes back to the thing about the person in the mirror. Do you want to be a hateful person who wants to harm other people? Or do you want to be the person that loves their parents, loves their kids, loves their spouse, loves their dog? And, you know, be the person you've always meant to be. So be that person. Do not dehumanize people that disagree with you. Don't get into yelling matches. Don't feel that you have to win. You know, don't feel that you have to serve the verbal or social media smackdown on somebody all the time and prove your point and be right. I get hit with these all the time. I found another doctor that says hydroxychloroquine works. Boom, smackdown. And it's like, well, no, it's actually 100% wrong, but I don't want to argue with you. So I'm not even going to say anything back. You know, this doesn't serve anything. You know, at the end of this election season, we are the same 327 million people that we were before, and we got to get along. So we need to start rebuilding those bridges now. And I mean, you know, I've got some pretty strong opinions on some things that need to happen. I don't think people should be torching cop cars in the street. I don't think anybody does, anybody that's reasonable. I also don't think that people who wear a badge should have any type of impunity, and I think they should all be held accountable for what they do. So I think we all agree on both of those two things. So let's not run to extremes. Let's not be divided. And I'm asking every person listening to this to just be the bigger person in the argument and not be the person that escalates it. And that's how it starts.
Yeah, excellent. I've made the analogy on the podcast before, I think, that it seems like we're in the trench warfare phase of the intellectual space. You know, everyone's moved out of the, I guess, gentlemanly combat where ideas were what mattered, and we've dug ourselves in. And if you're not in my trench, you're the enemy. You're in no man's land. You're fair game. And what does that do? That pulls everybody else into trenches because they don't want to get shot at. And I think that's a terrible, terrible way to go about the world of ideas. It's not good.
Yeah. And then a guy like me says hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, and his own guy starts shooting at him.
Right.
So
yeah, because you left the trench. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're pushing me out in no man's land.
Right.
And the guys on the other side of no man's land don't want me here. So what am I supposed to do? I don't know.
Yeah. You're just trying not to get shot at that point.
Just trying not to get shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some insight from my own kind of self-reflections on how, at least in my instance, and you brought this up, my like instincts would potentially go awry in conversations to create outcomes like that. It really is based, I think, on the need to win or have that like ego validation. And I think that's kind of ties into just how people do not want to admit wrong in a social situation. And I think that's kind of the core of what our podcast is based around, you know, being open to change your ideas, and not only in private, but in public, and make that a value, you know, a virtue instead of a vice. So I agree with what you were saying.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, Mike, let's do a couple of Q&A questions, and then I want to be respectful of your time, make sure that you've got time to do whatever else you need the rest of the night here. So we'll just do a couple of questions, and we'll let you pitch whatever you've got, where people can find you after that, and we'll wrap up. So if anybody from the audience here has some questions, you can go ahead and either pop them in the chat or just put an exclamation point. I'll call on you. I will let you unmute yourself and ask your own question. A couple of rules, as always. Make sure your questions are brief, they are on topic, and you are courteous. Feel free to disagree with anything that anyone has said, but be courteous. And we will not be doing follow-up questions unless there's a clarification. So that'll be Mike's choice. All right. So from the top here, we have Aldair. If you are still here, you have the first question.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yep, we can hear
Mr.
you.
Simpson. Yes, sir. So my question is: right now, I'm currently in 11 Alpha, and I'm still waiting on my orders.
Okay.
With COVID, I couldn't go. But so the biggest thing that I've learned so far is that I have to listen to my NCOs, and
Yes.
you know, just understand the mission to pretty much do my job with my platoon sergeant. So my question to you then is, because I'd like to go in the future, once I become a first lieutenant, is to try out for selection. That's actually something I want in my future. My question to you then is, what is it that is required for an officer? Because I know that the senior NCOs and NCOs are usually the ones that are doing the things with the Joes, but officers, on the other hand, they have like a burden of responsibility, but they're not always there. So what is it that what would you ideally see in an officer when it comes to leadership, so that they're effective with their platoon?
Yeah. So there's a very old saying in the military that that the NCO says to the officer is, "Sir, it's your mission, but they're my men," right? And I think that's kind of a microcosm of kind of the broader answer. Is basically what it amounts to is you are always as an officer going to be an extension of the commander's intent, right? So you're about the what. We have to take this hill, take this objective, whatever it might be. A level above you is about the why. So you're not necessarily going to know that all the time. Although you need to kind of distill as much of that why as you can down to your men, because it's going to help motivate them. The how is going to be a little bit more coming from your NCO, because he has the experience. He understands where the strengths and weaknesses of that platoon are. And so he's going to be a little bit more instrumental in the fine details of the plan. So I would encourage you to listen to him heavily on that. You need to hold your NCOs accountable, because it really is true. Your job when you get there is to listen and to put a lot of faith in that NCO. But I would be lying if I said 100% of NCOs are outstanding and are always going to do the right thing. So I did know some officers in their career that had to fire the first NCO they ever worked with. And I hope that's not the case for you. And it probably won't be, because those guys are rare. But I would say listen, and really listen to your men, your NCOs and your junior enlisted, and also always share as much information as you can, not at the expense of talking just to talk. There's nothing that a Joe hates more than all the other platoons are out of formation and have gone in the barracks and they're off for the weekend, and we're still standing out here talking. There's nothing that a Joe hates more than that. But whenever it comes to sharing information, so that they're kept in the loop, don't turn them into mushrooms, kept in the dark and fed only shit. Give them as much information as possible at all times, so that they stay engaged at all times, and look to cultivate those leaders, and ask for feedback. Don't ever be afraid to ask for feedback. What do you think? What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And lean heavily on the other platoon leaders that are in your company, who got there maybe a little bit before you. Don't trust 100% of what they say, but when it comes to getting the lay of the land, that's going to be really important. And ask. I would give you this advice too. When you first get there, ask all the other platoon leaders, in their opinion, who the best platoon sergeant in the company is, and see who that is. And if it's not your platoon sergeant, then look for those comparisons. And I'm not saying you should be saying to him, "Hey, you need to be more like this guy," but that'll give you some clues into how that really good platoon sergeant interacts with his lieutenant, how you should be interacting, and maybe the ways that you can even bring that NCO up a little. I had some outstanding officers that I worked with as a senior enlisted on my only deployment as team sergeant, and I learned a lot from him, and he helped me to be a better NCO, because he kind of cultivated what he saw as my strengths and pointed out where he saw my weaknesses.
All right, thank you.
Good luck.
Next up is Tanya.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. And I had a few things to kind of go over in terms of understanding some of my thought processes while you were speaking. So there seems to be a reality of egos and of being an awakened sort of individual. And majority of what you've said seems incredibly mature and sensible. I like the idea of being awoke. I don't know if you've heard of that term. I know you mentioned
awoke as opposed to being woke, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Basically, cognition of the ghost in the machine. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Kind of, yes. So like, what's your experience, or have you dabbled with that sort of metaphysical side of reality and understanding the collective unconscious in that sort of way?
Yeah, so that is totally my wife Denise's wheelhouse. That's way more her than it is me. At my core, in spite of being a physician, at my core, I am still that 11 Bravo infantry soldier that is technologically slightly above picking up a rock and hitting somebody with it. So a lot of the stuff like that, you know, and she has the patience of a saint in explaining it to me. But I think I see what you're getting at is I probably don't have the language for it like she does. But I see that as, you know, being very aware of yourself, being aware of how you fit in and interact with others, of how my goals either jive with or conflict with those around me. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
No, absolutely. Like we see like these big wars on Facebook, social media, which I've deleted for over 8 years now because I've predicted that it would come up. It would eventually be this sort of war between people's opinions and like who's what and personas and just a bunch of non-real like I guess truthful sort of things about people. It's just like these
Yeah.
people making up sort of these fictitious sort of personas. And I've always wondered, it's like, is
Yeah.
it their inability to understand the collective unconscious, or is there inability to see, you know, where they come from in terms of, well, who are we exactly?
Yeah.
Have they not yet understood that? I mean, I think we're in process of that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with a bunch of the new age kind of stuff going on now.
If I had to put my finger on one thing that I would say, I would put most of the blame on, and tribalism is something that's kind of hardwired into our DNA through generations because that's how we survived. So we still seek that now, even though, like you say, we are a part of a much larger collective unconscious. We don't see it that we have our primate brain has kind of a difficult way of looking at it that way because we're looking at a lot more in the terms of our tribe. And you know, I look around, I want to see people in my tribe that are similar to me, whether that, you know, that might mean in appearance, that might mean in thought, you know, whatever it might be. And people are seeking that. So I think that most of the blame kind of falls on that. But you know, that we talked about trench warfare earlier. If everybody's in their trenches, all they can see is the guns across no man's land facing them and the barbed wire and everything else. But if you were to get into a hot air balloon on Christmas Day and float up above that, you would see soldiers in both trenches sitting down carols and having fellowship together. I just changed to my. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay,
You cut off for half a second.
My
You're good.
earbuds finally quit, but so I think that's kind of the best way that I can wrap my brain around that. I hope that kind of answers the question. It's a pretty broad question, so I know that I probably didn't do it justice.
And you mentioned
no, you're
that,
good. I think it's, yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned your wife has the words for that, and she has a public presence too. Am I correct?
Yeah. So she's on all social media. At, you know, her Instagram is at Dr. Denise Simpson, Dr. Not doctor spelled all the way out. But if you just Google Dr. Denise Simpson, you can go to her website, drdenisesimpson.com. Anybody who needs any type of life coaching, I encourage you to go to her. Most of her clients tend to be women. She's done incredible things with young female leaders. I tell my physician colleagues all the time, if you have a high school, college age daughter, you absolutely need to get them, you know, listening to my wife, going to my wife's website. And she does amazing things. She's probably eavesdropping on me right now when she's doing what she does, whether it's podcasting or doing seminars online, and I'll kind of eavesdrop, and just the things that I hear motivate me. And I'm like, man, I wish I would have had somebody helping me plot my course the way she helps people plot their course when I was in my teens, 20s, even 30s. She's just incredible.
Awesome. We'll include at least that in the show notes as well. All right. Next up for a question is DJP.
Hey, Dr. Simpson. Wanted to know what you do for keeping your muscles, skeleton, joints healthy as you age, especially, you know, for high impact, recovering from high impact stuff your whole life. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's challenging. So kind of the secret for me has been is mostly in behavior modification, more than anything. I certainly do a lot, supplementation when it comes to, things like fish oil. I've even tried shark cartilage and things of that nature. Chondroitin is something that people talk about quite a bit. Really the big thing though is behavior modification. And there was a little bit of a craze in the 90s where everybody was going to all this, extreme low impact. And I think that was a little bit overkill. What I recommend to people and what I do is, I do squats, I do deadlift, because these are really important to build up accessory muscles and proprioceptive muscles, and stabilization and everything like that. Your core is always going to be important, whether we're talking about your abs, your psoas muscles, whatever it might be. I tend to do a lot of one-legged stuff, one-legged and one-arm stuff. So when I'm lifting weights, I don't do a lot of regular barbell bench press. I'll do dumbbell bench press, because if you're working both together, like if I'm just doing regular squats with both legs, they're kind of splinting one another, even though they're not right next to each other. So doing a lot of one-legged stuff, so, i.e. lunges and things like that, so you can have really well-rounded strength when it comes to your joint. That's going to help you minimize that impact and other things. I don't do a lot of 1-rep maxes. I do a lot of, sets. Typically I'll do an 8 to 10 one week, then a 10 to 12, and then maybe a 12 to 15 on the next week. And then adding weights as I move along in increments of 5 if I am adding weights. So, don't go into the gym trying to kill yourself. Don't do a lot of crazy stuff. Probably the most high impact thing that I do is box jumps. And that's not even incredibly high impact if you do them right. But that's important for me for explosivity when I'm grappling and fighting and coming off the line to shoot in time and things of that nature. And, as much benign supplementation stuff as you can do, whether that's turmeric or whatever it might be to help with the inflammation, and listen to your body, I think is a big key too. And know the difference between pain and injury. Is it muscle soreness? If it's muscle soreness, I can probably stretch a little bit and just slow down a little bit. Is it joint soreness? Maybe I need to take some Motrin and ice it and elevate it, and maybe even take a training day off. So kind of learn to differentiate those things you do. And then good diet, plenty of water, 16 ounces of water when you wake up in the morning, because your joints absorb your free water overnight. Your blood is the most viscous it ever is the moment you wake up in the morning. So you need to thin out your blood a little bit and also help to get some more liquids into your vertebral discs and everything else.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys for your questions. And Doc, Mike, you have been very generous with your time. This was awesome. If anybody is interested in finding you, I know we mentioned the podcast, anywhere where you're working on projects, anything else you want to pitch, let people know how they can get to follow up with you, see what you're doing.
If you go to drmikesimpson.com, I almost said drdeniseSimpson.com. You go to drmikesimpson.com, that's my website. There you can get on my mailing list. There's if you scroll down to the bottom of the page and click subscribe, you get on a mailing list. So when I have new things going on, I send that out. You can ask me a question directly, click contact, and that's a form that goes directly to me. You can shop my affiliates there. You can buy my individual first aid kits there. And that also has links to my Facebook, my Instagram. So if you don't want to hunt me there, you can just go to my website and then click the links from there so you can find me.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much. This was an awesome episode. It was great to get to meet you and talk to you. And I will continue listening to your podcast and absorbing all your awesome content. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up?
No, to quote Bill and Ted, be excellent to each other.
Nice. Great. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, guys. It was wonderful to meet you. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.